Okay, I think we are ready to start. So, hello everyone, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here again, and also some of you are here for the first time, so welcome. As you could see from the video screening that we just saw, the concept of the festival is becoming clearer now, I guess. You can see the different let's say, threads that we have tried to weave together. And I think the two authors that we have here are also part of that concept. So the first that I'm going to introduce is Rinne. She was born in Gothenburg, Sweden, and she has Finland and Swedish roots, and she grew up in Germany where she lives. She studied philosophy in Frankfurt, Helsinki, and Athens, and her minimalist and experimental texts are written in several languages, including English, German, and French. And the note says she tries to reduce complex philosophical and linguistic questions down to total essences. So we will learn about that in a minute, to tonal essences. Her work plays with phonetic similarities and sense shifts between languages, which is, I think, is a common trait of the authors that we have here, the four of them. We see them shifting between and across languages. Frequently, the starting point is an idea, a word, or a quote that is given shape, and then in performance develops a tone, a rhythm, or even a melody. So again, the relation with music is also important. She also has many visual works, and they've been shown in many places, including Berlin, Malmö, Copenhagen, Tallinn, New York. And she also has a number of books, including one that's over there, I think. And she has books published also all around Europe and also in Canada. So, Sia, thank you, and a very warm welcome for accepting our invitation. So maybe now I give the floor to Rui to introduce our other guest.
Yes, thank you, Manuel. And our second guest today and tonight is Jörg Piringer. Jörg was born and lives in Vienna, Austria. He's a member of the Institute for Transacoustic Research and Vegetable Orchestra. He's a radio artist, sound and visual poet, musician with a master's degree in computer science. We'll get there soon. And there's a huge list of works in digital, sound, visual, and interactive poetry, like political computer games, typographic hyperpoetry, radio poems, interactive sound poems, net art installations, apps, literary apps for iPhone and iPad, generative poetry, animated Instagram visual poetry, a ChatGPT prompt generator that automates the task to create ChatGPT prompts. And he has received, for these works and for many others to come, several grants and prizes, and was involved in multiple artist residencies. His work was also exhibited in festivals, and he often performs it live. He has 3 print books and several albums that you can listen to on Bandcamp, iTunes, and Spotify. He creates his own software for text modification, text generation, voice manipulation, plugins, performance of text-oriented art programs. And Jörg also creates custom hardware. In his own words, he's constantly developing new instruments to perform his poetry, music live on stage. So welcome to Lisbon, both of you, Jörg and Sia. It's really a pleasure and an honor to have you here with us. And now let's chat a little bit. Yeah?
Shall I ask the first question? Okay. So my first question comes directly from the biographical note of Sia, which is about the moving between languages and across languages. So the fact that your work, and maybe that's something that is common to many sound poets, have heightened consciousness of language by looking at how sounds allow you to move from one language to another.
Yes, precisely. I guess it's my parents' fault because they spoke Finnish and I could not understand it. They had their secret language, so I've been trying to learn language, but then, you know, when trying to understand them, some sound may have a significance in another language and you're trying to make your own ideas, and then the more languages you learn or try to learn or learn words in, the more possibilities there are. So I guess it started from there. But I mainly use 3 languages that mostly people understand. It's the 3 larger European languages: English, German, and French. But so that has not really anything to do with my biographical background. I don't use the languages that are completely private, so to say. Swedish and Danish and Finnish, which I did not master at all as a child, but there are other languages from other projects. Yeah.
Well, I'll ask something to Jörg now, which is also connected to languages, but not necessarily linguistic languages. You studied computer science, you have ventured in the realms of electronic music, radio art, sound and visual, and electronic poetry. How does this background and experience and even expertise influence your sound poetry specifically?
I only speak 2 languages, that's German and English, of course. But I write many more, but most of them are computer languages. And they're not really... People think that computer languages are meant for machines, but in fact it's the other way. They're meant for humans to understand computers and to tell them what to do. And in fact it's a little bit like writing a play for a theater, but in theater people enact the play, but in a computer, the computer does act for you. And that informs my poetry, but also my way of performing. Like you mentioned, I grew up with listening a lot to electronic music. Like in the 90s, in Vienna, there was a huge scene of very experimental electronic music. And I was still considering myself as a poet then, which I still do, but now it's more extended maybe. And I thought, okay, it would be great to use these methods they were using, like they were using the first laptops on stage, doing live electronic sounds with that. And I always thought poetry should have similar ways to treat language, because music and language, they're related in a way. And also we are really influenced by all these electronic sounds. Like when you use your phone, you hear a voice of the other one, but you still it's influenced by how these systems work. Like when the connection breaks and stuff, you hear these electronic sounds. So I thought poetry should also work with that.
So can we extend this question to Sia? So do you see technology also playing a role in the way you are aware of language and sound?
Not really. The technological part I prefer to leave to other people. It's really not my specialty. I'm very slow with such things. So all of the works that have been used, or where my texts have been put to music, or that has been done by other people. So this is nothing that I have any control of. Or I do, of course, but no. It is really the human voice and the linguistic. It's a sort of an archaeology, like you're going into the roots. It's more actually backwards than forwards, I would say. Whatever. It may sound very, very modern, but in fact it's really going to what did this mean there, what could that mean somewhere else, and I really like to go to the roots. And then of course make fictive archaeology, which is nothing to do with scientific linguistics. It's like making your own. So which I think is like, I was told that has to do with how you learn language as a child. Because I always, these questions come very often, but then I was told by a psychologist, is exactly, I think it's called relational something theory, I can't remember exactly, but the way you learn that a chair is called a chair, and I don't know, objects have certain terms in a certain language, and then you know how to name them. But apparently I do that between languages. I don't know exactly, from word to word, not object word, but word. So Stefan Rieblinger, he wrote that some poets write words about the world, and then there are the other poets who write words about words. I think there's something like in between. So I came completely away from the technology question now.
Yeah. So when you talk about the tonal essence, what does it mean? Because I think it has to do with that going backwards that you are mentioning. So going to some kind of deep connection with the embodied voice.
That must have been a silly text that I tried to get to the point, like to exactly the essence. What is it really? And every time you're asked, and I think I'm circling around the question, circling around. Maybe you get closer and closer. This is very old, so maybe it's not really tonal essence. I mean, it basically, I think I was thinking when I wrote that it becomes there is some sort of sonority to it then. Sequences. It's not single poems, they all only work in a sequence, but the more there are, then they get a rhythm. But as themselves, they do work as single objects too, or single very short texts, but it's more the sequence. So that's the tonal sequences I was referring to, I guess.
Sia, you acknowledge your influences in your biography. You acknowledge some of your influences, and I would like to return to these, to both of you, asking both of you later. But without being specific, you refer Fluxus, Dada, the Moscow conceptualists, and what seems to unite these references for me and for you, I'm sure, it's their playful approach. Are you specifically interested in humor, considering that this seems to be an important aspect of historical or perhaps hysterical sound poetry? On YouTube, just a brief parenthesis, on YouTube, comments often describe sound poetry videos as insane, hilarious, crazy. And for instance, in Steve McCaffrey's reading from Carnival, which we exhibited yesterday, there's one comment there that says, "Geez, that dude is a university teacher? His classes must be freaky." So how do you respond to these reactions, and what role does humor play in your work?
Yeah, a very big one, but it's one thing that it's so hard to talk about, because maybe what I think is really funny, nobody else finds funny. So, humor it's personal. We all think, I like it when there's humor, but define humor, and then we talk about it. But still, that is absolutely, I think without humor, it's not fun. That's a tautology. But anyway, the first works that I thought were somehow opening up language in a different way were those of Thomas Schmidt and Arthur Köpke, German Fluxus artists. I don't know if they're very known outside of this, I don't know, little Fluxus Berlin word or whatever. But the way of putting words and images in context, and this also happens when artists use words in their works. There's some sort of that tension that is created, which is not one-to-one, but there's some sort of tension in between that. And then also you use words to say something, but also you, at the same time, question this. It's like a mise en question of language and how you use language, and are you really sure that we all mean the same things? And this humor is really, I actually really love the early works of Henri Chopin, where he still uses language, where he tells this fictional story how people tried to escape language, and then they only used morphemes, like everybody was communicating in the morpheme of u, like u, and they would ask u, and then the answer would be u, and everybody was happy. No misunderstandings. Everybody knew exactly how to communicate, and then it all was reduced to ciphers, to numbers, and the radio emissions were pure avant-garde, which was 1, 2, 3 fever. 760. I don't know. This is fun. But I'm not, it's not the flat sort of humor. It's some sort of esprit, where you're simultaneously. Okay. I don't know. I think it is. I can't explain, but I think it's a very fine balance. It's some subtle humor. Yeah. So this is what I'm trying to achieve. In the end, I don't know if it works.
And what about you, Jörg? Does humor belong in your sound poetry? I'm thinking that maybe you could tell us about the vegetable orchestra, or maybe your apps, which are kind of funny as well, or maybe even more the ChatGPT prompt generator.
Yeah, I would agree that humor is essential. Like, it's essential to our lives, of course, because without humor, I don't know, we could not stand the whole thing. But then also for poetry, I think, because it's a way of like you mentioned, or you mentioned someone, but you mentioned playfulness, and I think that's, at least for me, a way of working. It's usually I have an idea what I want to do, but then it doesn't turn out like I thought it would turn out, but maybe more interesting and maybe more funny, and then I go from there. And it's like when you're at a bar at the evening and you make jokes. It's like this dialogue that's really interesting, or maybe more than two people or a lot of people, and you can't really repeat that because it's something that's happening in the moment. And I like this kind of thing that happens in the moment. Like when I perform with the computer, but also when I write these computer programs, that's really necessary. And also in the books, most of them are unfortunately in German, but there's some kind of humor in them. And yeah, the vegetable orchestra is maybe something completely different because it doesn't use a computer at all. But it's also, it has some humor, but it has a humor that it's not a comedy project, right? It's not, you laugh the whole time. People are kind of astonished when they see it the first time, but then they realize it's real music. And when we're on stage, then it's also this kind of communication, like we play pieces that are kind of have a composition and stuff, but there's also some kind of improvisation in there. And also because we use vegetables as instruments, so they break a lot, and we know that they will break at some point. So you have to kind of be quick-minded in a way to just change the things you're doing, and that's kind of humor. It's a quick mind. It's kind of having fun being there and doing something. Yeah.
What about the
Well, the ChatGPT prompt generator is kind of a story, because I wrote this book in 2021, which was actually about GPT. That's kind of the technology behind ChatGPT, and then it was published in 2022 in autumn, in fall, and 2 months later ChatGPT was kind of published. So I kind of wrote this book, which is also kind of funny because it's trying all this technology and making fun with it, and also serious. But then, of course, ChatGPT happened, and everybody was using it. So I thought, okay, what can I do now? I wrote this book. I already said everything. So I wrote this ChatGPT prompt generator, which kind of automated the whole thing. So it made the human completely unnecessary, and was kind of a comment about that. So you don't have to have your own ideas, not even for the prompt. So the machine does it as well.
So let me go back to I think one of the most interesting aspects of your work, which is the way you are really interrogating our relation with computers in many ways, and I think that is a very good example. And in terms of the sound component in your work, which is also very prominent, how would you see the ways in which programming has allowed you to have a different kind of conscious about sound? Is there an element of the decomposition of sound that comes from your experience as a programmer?
Yeah, well, it's related to electronic music, because I was still very fascinated by electronic music, because it extends the way you can treat language, and then I use, I don't know, traditional normal programs to make music and to make sound poetry as well. But then sometimes I hit a kind of threshold what the computer program can do and what they cannot do, or it would be really, really a lot of work to do that. Like, I don't know, making very small pieces and repeat them 1,000 times, and it makes a kind of certain way, a certain sound. And because I can program these things myself, I'm usually faster programming it than doing it all by hand. And also it changes the way how to compose, because when you think things can be automated, you can think in a kind of meta composition way. Like I made these pieces that are not the same every time I perform, because the program has some kind of randomness inside, and it also surprises me. I'm not showing this piece today, but I have this piece where the letters move on screen, and depending where the letters move, they kind of make a different sound, and I improvise with that. So the computer is kind of a partner, an improvisation partner, using my own voice that's sampled and then played back. So I kind of react to the program, and the program reacts to me, and it's kind of that's a technique that's only possible with programming computers. I wouldn't see it any other way.
Well, it's interesting, because if you noticed, one of the reasons why we selected Henri Chopin and that particular performance, so this is 2005, he's already at the end of his life, and he's revisiting his recordings. So those recordings are from maybe 40, 50 years earlier, in the 1950s and 1960s, when he was recording his own voice, and he really used the tool in a way to try to capture all the embodied sounds, regardless of any linguistic articulation. And it's interesting to see how he was already trying to experiment with the kind of layering and sampling of his own voice, and he becomes. It's really curious that he kind of sometimes seems surprised in that performance to listen to his own recording, and he gets he plays with the speed of reproduction, and then he produces sounds over the recorded sounds. And so I think all of that also shows one of the transformations, one of the historical transformations of sound poetry that is a consequence of media, a consequence that we can become aware of our voices and the sounds that we produce through recording. So in many ways I see a link between what Henri Chopin is doing or trying to do there and the kind of description that you are offering of the improvisation through programming. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, I would agree. Well, of course, I think I've seen Chopin a couple of times, and maybe 2005 this year. And of course, it was always inspiring. Also because he uses his voice in a really free way, but then using technology that he had available at his time. I don't know if he would do it now, then he would also maybe work with computers or program computers. I don't know, but that was reacting to the technology that was kind of new, because he started in the 50s and the tape machines were really new at this time. And of course, everybody then later knew how to use or what tape recorders could do, but he was experimenting with it and making new works that would have not been possible on paper or whatever.
Sia, you have studied philosophy, and I'm curious to know if that background has some sort of influence in your performances and installations and generally in your work. But more specifically, you say that you are interested, and your work reveals it, in minimalist approaches. And if you allow me to quote you, you refer to this reducing of complex philosophical and linguistic questions down to tonal experiences. And so my question is, how does this minimalist philosophy affect, shape, influence your work?
Well, in that, if I start by the end of your question, then what Duchamp said, reduce was my thought. I think it's exactly the word, but I will read it later. Yeah, I try to reduce really, and actually it's related to studying philosophy, because I started studying philosophy in Frankfurt but people came from all over the world to go to study at Frankfurt School, which was no longer existing, of course. There were some professors still from that time, but it was so complex that I had to make images of it so that I could understand a little bit, because I came straight from school there. And one thing that happened was that I thought that I had to study literature because I always used to write. But literature was awful. It's like the symbol of bread in both novels, and you discussed that for 3 hours, and you had to read like 50 books in a week. And I lost my capacity to write by studying literature, or literature studies, and it's Germanistic. So I always was with the philosophers, because there were discussions about language, which is a lot more interesting, and not only about language, about a lot of things. I wrote my thesis about Hans Jonas, which is very not related to language. Oh, well, everything is related to language, and this is precisely the problem also. So, studying philosophy, I somehow lost the ability to write freely, because everything was, is this logical now? Or am I really using this word? Am I only using a concept that already exists? It's like this Roland Barthes, are we only like serving ourselves for the existing language? Is this just a cliche that I'm using, or do I really think that this is what I think, and how can I be sure that, that sort of thing. So studying was not, in that sense, really a practical thing. It took me a long time, so this is probably why I write these very short things, that they are very open to interpretations. They're minimalist, which is, I think, who was it? Steve Bird said that minimalist or minimal poems are so open that everybody, I cannot recall that quote properly, but there is this book about it, a quote about minimal writing. So when it is that open, there can be no misunderstanding, because everybody will understand something different. A professor in Athens, when I was studying there, he said in my text he found a lot of things that I would never imagine, of course. It's like the book is more clever than the author, always. So you are using, when you're using language, you're already in trouble. Like Henri Chopin also said, it's a bit like you have to defend yourself in front of a court, and why do you use this word instead of that one? And so So I guess this is not really answering the question on minimalism, but yes, Thomas Schmidt, who was my very first inspiration when I read his, he was asked by Wilma Lukács in this Montagsgespräche book where she's interviewing him about this method, and he had this very beautiful quote, which I think, and he said, what you can do as a sculpture you do not need to build as architecture, and what you can do in a painting you do not need to do as a sculpture, and so on, and then it ended. And what you can make up in your mind, you do not even need a note, nothing, you just make it up in your mind. And I also think that this is exactly, that it's reduction. So you can start from an idea, but then you reduce it, and in the end you have the essence. And I think that's very beautiful. It's like this against this massive production of all sorts of things. And it's enough with the idea sometimes, and then you imagine.
So one of the consequences of minimalism is that there's a moment when the essence is nothing. Does that happen?
Yes. There was something, it is a reduction towards almost nothing. That would probably be the idea, but yeah. What was it? I saw this recently, something, nada. Oh, nothing to declare, of course, when we arrived at the airport. And I thought it would be an idea to go to the airport and say, I have nothing to declare. And then, what is nothing? And then, because it is like a lot, nothing. That's huge. Maybe it would be an idea to declare nothing.
Well, it leads to cage, right? Silence. I have nothing to say, and I am saying it.
There's a question that I would like to address to both of you, which is related to the way words are or are not present, or are the fulcrum of your work. Because we have sound poets that, although they do lots of work with the voice, they work around the word or beyond the word, and they don't need words. But there are sound poets that still make the word the fulcrum of their work. So I would like you to talk about your work in relation to the place of the word within the sound, the kind of sound performances that you make.
I used to be very strict about that, and I did not use words. I started the first sound poetry works, so I just sampled things on radio and made pieces out of that. And there were some words, but only very little. And yeah, now I don't care that much anymore. I do pieces that have no words. A lot of them have letters because I also do the videos for them. But then I do also poetry, like poetry with words only. Yesterday I confessed I'm writing a novel. So I don't care anymore. There used to be, I was always fascinated when I went to France, because there they have this, or used to have, maybe it's also different, they had this kind of gap. There were the ones using words and the ones who hated the ones who were using words, and the other way around. And I was always fascinated because I think, yeah, maybe it's not that important. So, yeah.
Can you imagine a sound novelist?
Sure. I think there's some.
Words, yes. I only use words, I think. They're enough already for me. But I used to work with Tomomi Adachi and the Sound Poets Quartet Berlin, where we also did some historical pieces, where you have to improvise, and it's not just Dada pieces, but also where you run improvise, even with Jaap Blonk, where I had to shout, and it was like totally against my nature. But I had to, then you learn, and you think, oh, this is part of it, also dancing and doing all sorts of things that you never thought that you would be doing, like just sounds and things like that. But in my proper own work, it's words. I started with words and I continued with words, and then the step forward was to use sentences, which is like, that's already big for me, but it's the wrong direction, I think.
So maybe we can now ask the audience if there are comments or questions for our guests. Anyone? No? Okay.
That's fine.
Not for the time being.
I'd like to ask Jörgen about, and then Sia can respond to that as well if she wants, about collaboration. And identify a certain tension between, on the one hand, you use and you are interested in interactive collaborative systems, and you often work with online communities as well. And radio is a global communitarian project, so to say. But at the same time, you have also this profile of an individual programmer, artist, crafting your own software. So how do you manage to deal with this tension between collaboration with the community and sharing your work with the community, because all of your software is available as open source? And at the same time remixing it?
Well, not all of my software is open source. Most of them actually is not, but some things are. Yeah, but I don't know. When you work with software, you're using so much things that other people did. So I thought some things I could give back, and that's in a way a kind of collaboration. But also, I don't know, if you write poetry, you're always collaborating because you listen to people, you use the language you did not invent, you're using all the sayings that are in the language. And if you're doing music, then you're collaborating also, even if you're a solo musician, but then you have to publish it somehow. Yeah, but with the Vegetable Orchestra, it's a huge collaboration. But I also did collaborative pieces with other solo artists or small groups and stuff. So I do most of my work I do alone, I think, because that's what's the easiest for me. But I'm not against collaboration, because it gives you something different. It's a different influence. You have to react to it. It's challenging. It can be really great things. So I don't know. Maybe 10% is collaboration and the rest is not.
Yeah, same here. And it can be really a good experience to collaborate, because you put yourself to completely back and you just serve the which you also do with your own work, but then you're responsible for every part of it. So collaborating when you're performing together with others, it's really like a theatre production, everything. So you become part of a bigger thing, and you also have to, if you have ideas, like I had very clear ideas about how my text had to be pronounced, which I had to forget everything about, which is very good, actually, because I learned that they can be rhythmical too, so you can move to them and things like this. So it's a learning process always. I think you learn a lot more from collaborations than just working on your own or permanently. And now in recent years, it has not been much, well, the dance and the poetry collaborations with Tomomi, I've had duos too with him, and he's super strict in he taught me a lot about keeping the rhythm. I've noticed that I had absolutely no feeling for rhythm. So if you do it on your own, you don't have to take care of whatever. So it's like, well, and then he put in, he was counting and said, yes, yeah, you have to be more precise. And I was like, oh, I thought I was. But recently I've been writing for text for music or put them, or libretti, as you say, from musical pieces and also instructed. And that is then a completely new work, because I've always been dreaming of writing my text and giving them to other people to perform, actually, which is like, it's a dream. I once saw a theatre play where people were using just this nonsense language. In Finnish, you can say the same thing. It means my fault, your fault, his fault, their fault. And there it is, mon sy, son sy, hänen sy, kenen sy, and so on. And I was then doing this February, which is, I'm no longer sure whether that is a collaboration, because then I tell people what to do. So that's no longer a clear collaboration. but it's one of the best things that has happened recently, I would say. It's very good also to hear other people pronounce your work. It's like put in a test. And then the other things is doing exhibitions also. That is not a clear collaboration either. That's a collaboration between the image and the space and all that. Every time you're doing so, he's testing the work from all angles. Yeah. No, well, I think this is about it, collaborations.
So I forgot to say that you can ask in Portuguese if you're not comfortable with asking in English, and I'll translate. So if anyone has any comment, please feel free to intervene. So I'm going to pose a similar question that I posed to yesterday's artists. They did quite answer, but maybe you'll answer. What should we expect from your performances tonight, and how did you decide to do this particular selection of works? It's kind of a preview.
Yeah, I'm still deciding the last part. Yeah, it's always like this, but it's so great to have a whole stage with light and sound. Is super possible. It's not always like this, but the way that I work is testing my text in front of the audience before publishing. So I'm always reading, and then you notice very clearly, does this work or does this not? So I'm reading new text just because you're experiment. Let's see. And it's not because of the reaction of the audience, it's just you feel it immediately, whether it works or not. So I'm reading my the sentences, the most recent, which is then where I actually put more words than just 2 or 3 together, but like a whole sentence. And then earlier works, and then the new works. That's it. I think the new works, I always have like some sort of envelope title for the new project I'm working on. This was first Notes for Soloists, and then it was L'usage du mot, and now it's Wasting My Grammar. It's actually not what is written there, so I will not read Notes for Soloists. Because you asked like several months ago, how can you know? I can't plan like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm doing a new piece, but I did it once in Paris like 2 months ago. But when I say new piece, it's actually a couple of pieces. I mean more than 20, but they're very short, and there are these kind of video sound pieces which are happening. Most of them are happening live, so I do something with the voice and the video is generated and stuff. And it's also working, because I started this recently, to work with speech recognition, so it recognizes my voice and recognizes sounds and incorporates it in there. And that might fail quite a lot. And I also use computer voices a lot, so also the computer speaks. And what else to say? Yeah, well, it's a huge I use automatic translation in one piece and things like that. So it's very short pieces, like a collection, and it will grow. So the next time you see this performance, it will be different, maybe longer, shorter, different pieces. Actually, it's like kind of a laboratory where I try out things, and also for me, and a lot of failure. I said that maybe it could happen, so enjoy.
Yeah, let's discuss failure in a way. So you both use technology in different ways, of course, in different levels, but technology is there for you. And I'm sure that you found in your history of live performances a lot of challenges. So I would like to tell us about those challenges and possibly bring some funny examples of when things really went bad. And how do you overcome them, and what strategies have you acquired and learned from those experiences?
Maybe I can start. Well, there are certain kinds of failures. Like there are these failures where, I don't know, I had this once when I was doing a performance in Austria where I wanted to show a piece, and it was all fine during the rehearsals, but then in the evening the video projector didn't show the image, so it just didn't show it, and there was some problem with the connection or whatever, and that was when I was supposed to go on stage, and that was really horrible. That's nothing that, and there's hard, what can you do? So we kind of postponed it, and the next act came first, and then we tried again, but it didn't work, and in the end I performed another piece, which is easier when I do it in Austria, because then I can do something in German, and it has this kind of radio play performance piece, which works. But here it would be much complicated because I don't have much written texts in English or stuff, not in Portuguese at all. And so I need this kind of interaction and things. So if the computer breaks down today, it will be horrible. But I don't know. I will improvise something. But let's hope it doesn't happen. But and then there are other failures which are not really that kind of problematic. Like when you perform, something will go wrong, and you know that, because for me that's kind of the thrill why I go on stage, because I don't know, I had these performances which I did a lot of times, and in the end I was really bored because I knew what would happen and I rehearsed it that well, so it was not a challenge anymore. So when I do a new piece, it's more fun for me actually, because small things happen and then you have to improvise and then you kind of learn. So that's not a problematic failure. But when these things happen that kind of cut the show, we talked yesterday at the bar about our worst experiences. I won't repeat them because they were horrible. So that's not fun. Because that's kind of, it's also disappointing when I don't know, I came here, traveled a couple of hours, and I come here and it completely doesn't work. It's, why did I come here? So it's kind of just to bore you with something I make up in 20 seconds. No. So let's hope not.
Same here. I think I have a whole series of fiasco readings and performances where from the monitor's not working, where you do not hear your own voice, you have no idea what you're saying, until there's some sound engineer experimenting with the sound while you're reading, and people think it's part of the performance, which is not. And somebody has been stealing the instruments, so they use something else, and I almost lose my hearing. And then collaboration, which I stopped doing collaborations because of this failure, sort of, because somebody organized a musician to accompany because they do not trust that the voice is enough. And while walking on stage, he asked me, "Could you please? Can he not accompany you?" And I think at the last performance, so they have engaged a musician who came there. Nobody wanted to perform with him, and I'm the last one. So I feel really bad, and I say, okay, if he does something minimal, and it's like, and it turned out that he had a whole jazz concert while I was reading my middle. It's like water and oil. It's like that, and I was too polite. So that's a complete. But you learn. You maybe become a little bit more. I don't know if you learn. I hope that you learn. Then there are some things that you, of course, could control yourself. When I was really sick and I had to perform, because it's also collaboration when you're with other people. And I had a fever, so I took so many painkillers that like every step I took, I was flying. So it's zero control about my body, which is not very good in a dance piece where you actually have to perform. But then about when people misunderstand things, I think that can also be a quite productive thing, because if I'm wasting my grammar, for example, has been understood. Then they start thinking, wasting my grant money. That's a great idea, actually. They think, and then they start coming with their stories about the grant money that they have wasted. And I don't know, that's not the title, but it's actually really interesting. And then the other people, very many have understood as wasting my grandma, like my grandmother, and then they come with grandmother stories and think, well, why? I say, it's the grammar. I think it's my pronunciation. But this is, for example, like these things can really lead to something, and a lot of the things that I'm working with are these misunderstandings in language, across languages, but also just in one single, it's enough. And there's a lot of possibilities for misunderstanding that can actually be really, really fruitful.
So at one point in Jaap Blanc's, in between the two readings, he was mentioning the moment in the 1970s when he listened to Hugo Ball's poem, and that kind of opened the field for him. He realized that he could become an explorer of that language and that type of performance. And I was wondering, if you look back on your history of developing as poets and artists, is there such a moment, or how have you become the kind of artist that you are now?
There's not that one moment. There are many, I think. Like, I don't know. I remember seeing a performance by Chopin in Vienna. That was really beginning of the 90s. That was really impressive. Like, I didn't know him, so that was kind of amazing. But then other things, like listening to music, certain things happening. Also theater, and I don't know. I came from my parents had a lot of books, so I read a lot of different kind of stuff, from very traditional stuff to also avant-garde stuff. So I was always interested in language, so to say. So and then when I started writing very bad poetry at the age of 17, when you're a teenager and you feel that the world is horrible and you're very alone and stuff. And I wrote this poetry, and then I read other poetry, and I discovered, okay, well, this has been done. Okay, this has been done as well. Okay, and this as well. And then when you live in Austria, there's always the figure of Ernst Jandl, who had done a lot of experimental things, and he was a huge pop star in Austria. And okay, so I cannot repeat that because everybody knows it. So I had to do something different. So, and then this electronic music thing happened, and I kind of combined it.
Yeah, okay, those are two, like, it's the influences and then how you yourself discover. So it's a little bit tricky, because I don't think that you can really be separated. But for me, when I was, to start from when I realized that you can actually speak it loud, because if you want to know about sound poetry, then because I did my first book actually completely for myself, because I thought nobody will publish it, so I never asked the publisher, because I thought I did not know what it was. I knew it's not poetry, it's not literature, it's not art, it's something in between, and I don't know. I was inspired by all sorts of things that I had seen in Frankfurt for studying, but also dance, and also a lot of what you call minimal music, because there's this repetition, and a certain subtle thing that may change, for instance. And then I was invited a year after that book came, and it was published in 2001. I was invited to Sweden to read from it. No, I was not invited to read from it. I wouldn't have gone. I was invited to a poetry conference to just talk about it, which I had never talked about it. I didn't know how to do. And then in the evening, we had the sort of gathering where people would read their work. And I was asked then to read from it. And I said, no, I can't read from it. That's a misunderstanding. You can look at it. I can show it. It's visual. but I can't read, and I never did that. And then it was Jonas, my later publisher, he then said, we will publish your next book. I said, yes, you read. So I was looking up, oh my gosh, what to read from this. And that experience, I went through which pieces of this, because there's a lot of drawings, it's not really made for that. I never thought about it like that. I mean, I was reading it a lot, and then I realized, oh, that's actually not completely impossible. So the next book was then Notes for Soloists, which is totally done as a partition. What is that? A score, yes. So then it's just like then sonor. But from the influences, yes, that's every art form that uses a little bit of text, it immediately becomes a lot more interesting, I think. Or maybe even the sequences. I mean, many music does not need text either, but the words become somehow so essential if there is nothing else, and then suddenly there's a word, then you really pay attention to it. And now I know, the very first thing that when I noticed that, what is interesting when you write is something that just happened. I was writing on an Italian newspaper, answered this question carefully, and then I made the boxes yes, no, without thinking. And then I looked at it and I said, what, it's like, I'm not following the rules of language. There is no question. I did not know that there was like this earlier work. But this was something I wrote when I was 19, like using English. And I think from that it started. You actually can use language beyond logic. You can use language like you use an instrument. That came a lot later. I'm using languages that I don't master. You just use them like colors or instruments maybe. So that is probably the very first, such experiences.
Yes. Tell us about your books. Meaning, both of you. You have books published, and how do they relate to your sound poetry? Are they some sort of result of your practice, or on the opposite, they serve as scores for future performances? Yesterday, for instance, we saw Alfredo performing his books, so his books serve as kind of scores for his performances. I'm assuming that in the case of Jörg, your books are kind of a result of practices that you do with your software, but I'm just assuming it. I would like to hear from you. So use this opportunity to tell your public about how many books you have and how they were built and how do they serve your sound poetry purposes or not.
Could I start? Well, actually, they're not sound poetry, to be honest. Or only a little bit like the first one I published. It's called Datenpoesie in German, data poetry. I later translated it, and that was kind of the result of and it was published very late. So it was published 2018. I did much work before then, but not publishing books. And that was kind of I wrote this software that could write. Where I could put small programs in it, and then it would generate a book. And of course, writing the programs were kind of the poetry. And some of them might be considered as sound poetry, but I don't perform them like I go on stage and then I read from the book. It's similar to what I showed today. It's kind of this software where I perform. Also, some pieces I perform today are in the book. And sometimes it's interaction, sometimes I ask the audience a little bit of input and stuff. So it's kind of performing the book, but the results are different than what's in the book. And then I translated it. I had to translate it myself because I didn't translate the actual text, but I translated the computer programs. And they generated similar ideas in English, but not all of them that are in the German book are also in the English book because they're two different languages, as you know, and they have different, different ways of working. And also, it was the English one is much thinner, so they couldn't publish the whole thing. And then there was this book about GPT, which is kind of, it's a kind of experimental, it's kind of a research about artificial intelligence and text, but also then writing about it, like the kind of long-form poems. And the most recent one, that's something else entirely again. That's really like poetry. Most of the poetry I wrote myself. Some of them are written by the machine, but I don't say which ones. So, and when I perform this one, I read the poetry and make some sound. So it's very, for me, it's almost like a poetry reading, very traditional. And yeah, the next one will be something else entirely. And I don't want to kind of restrict myself to a certain form, which has always to be the same. I don't know. Sometimes I just read poems as well. I like it.
I have very few books because it takes me such a long time to compose them somehow. And I'm testing them, as I said before. And for most of them, it has been taking 7 years, always. So that's the rhythm, like 7 years of testing and collecting. Because they're so short, it also takes some time. The only exception was sentences, because I had an exhibition, and for that exhibition you were asked to produce a little publication, which I wouldn't otherwise probably not have done. But that was very good. I produced 100 copies, and then that's the sentences book, which was a fast production, I think just a year or so. But otherwise they take a long time, and they're actually the result of my readings. So it's the other way around. I know many work the other way around. The book is out, and then you start reading. But for me, it's like I'm reading, and then I know that once the book is out, this is exactly the way I'm going to read it. And they have been organized, or this is the way they have no theme in that sense. So they're not very different. It's like a series of the works. So there's no central theme for any of them. It's a continuous work. But in the book, there are sort of chapters, like the book spread is a chapter. And so orientation or I cannot even remember anything. But anyways, I'm trying to organize them like that. And that they work visually and in the sense with what they are about, and then also as a reading. So in that sense, they become a score, yes.
So I wonder if there are questions now that we have moved forward a few more minutes or comments. No? So, Rui, do you have any final question, or shall
Yes.
we? Yeah, okay.
One more.
One
Is that
more.
okay? Considering that the audience is not reacting, I'd like to ask you about audiences. How do you engage, not necessarily in tonight's performance, but in your performances, do you engage with the audiences? Because it's something that connects to experimental radical poetics usually, but not necessarily. And how do audiences react to your work? I don't want to insist in the failure thing, but do you have any stories about audiences being angry about your nonsensical and asemical performances?
Oh, it is very important to have an audience, although you maybe don't get a reaction, but you can feel it, sort of. It does not make much sense to read for yourself somehow. So for me, there are some pieces where I actually am looking into the audience, or it's like a sort of, but it's not like interaction. It's a lot more subtle, and you can feel sort of what is happening. But no, it's not. It is the same reading always, but it's depending on I think the language where you are. That some parts are understood in differently in certain parts. So that is a difference. I had really only one horrible experience where people really hated it, and they really just did not understand what I was doing. There was an elderly man who came and said, "Can I see your book?" I did. Well, what does it mean? It makes no sense at all. I thought that was quite funny, actually. Like, I will never read here again.
Yeah, well, in my case, there's different ways of the audience kind of reacting. Well, there's these interactive pieces where the audience has a real role. And there's also this online performance where people can interact on the screen, and they're all typing kind of the performance. That's the kind of mode, and I don't do much, so it's kind of their way. But then there are others, like, I don't know, the normal performances. And today I will also ask a few things to the audience. It's very simple. That's kind of a reaction. And then sometimes there are the people who kind of go to a poetry reading and then they see this guy working with computers and talking about technology and working with that. And some people are really irritated by that. Not many, but some are really irritated because I had this once at a poetry conference where this one guy, he was an actor actually, and he was very much involved into the poetry of Friedrich Hölderlin. So I don't know if you know, Friedrich Hölderlin is the kind of the god figure of German poetry, and he was really, and it was amazing because he did this kind of, he analyzed his poetry, the syllables and stuff, and then he analyzed how much syllables are in this sentence and this sentence. And when I see his speech, I was thinking, wow, that looks like computer linguistics. So that he works like statistics about his thing, but he really hated what we were talking about, and I didn't understand because he was doing the same we did, but he just, I don't know. But there are sometimes these people who think that computers should do, I don't know, mathematics and not art, and they should be kept away from these things. It's kind of sad because, well, for me at least it's sad. Maybe for him not, I don't know. Yeah, that's kind of a fun story I have.
Thank you. Well, thank you both.
Shall we close? Okay. So thank you very much, Jörg, Sia, and thank you all. So we'll be back at 9 tonight for the performances. So thank you.